and welcome to the webinar 10 Reasons to Learn Dutch. It's one of the most common questions of people who spend a longer time in the Netherlands. Should I learn Dutch or not? And one of the answers usually is, why would you do that if everybody speaks English? Well, today I will try to answer that question. But first, about the language itself. I'll start by introducing myself in Dutch. Mijn naam is Bart de Pauw. Ik ben een Nederlander. Wat is mijn werk? Ik ben directeur. Ik ben directeur van BLC Language Courses. Ik ben een online docent Nederlands en ik ben de organisator van de Dutch Summer School en de Dutch Winter School. Dit jaar komen 500 studenten naar mijn school, maar nu ben ik op vakantie. Ik ben in Spanje. Het is hier lekker warm en gezellig. Well, I think that even those of you who haven't learned a word of Dutch yet could perfectly understand me, couldn't you? My name is Bart de Pauw. I am Dutch. What is my job? I am a director. I am the director of BLC Language Courses. I am an online Dutch teacher and I am the organizer of the Dutch Summer School and the Dutch Winter School. This year, 500 students will come to my school. Now, I am on vacation because, yes, as I'm working in the summer, I have to choose another part of the year for my vacation. I am in Spain and it's nice and warm here. Okay, so at first sight, the Dutch language doesn't seem that difficult because in this text, basically every word you should be able to understand if you know English. Well, perhaps just two words. Lekker and gezellig. These are typical Dutch words and they are very important to know for any foreigner in the Netherlands because the Dutch use them a lot and there isn't really an exact translation in English. Lekker means literally tasty, but we use it for much more than just food. For example, the weather or even someone's ass can be lekker. And the word gezellig means cozy, sociable, nice. And when Dutch people are in a group and they feel well, they say, "Hè, gezellig." So remember these words well. Okay, so it doesn't seem so difficult, but the question is, why would you learn this language? Can you survive in the Netherlands without speaking Dutch? Well, I guess that's not a difficult question to answer. Of course you can. The Dutch speak English, so for sure you won't die if you don't know the language. And that's the reason that a lot of expats, people who work here and people who study in the Netherlands, simply don't think of learning Dutch, at least in the beginning. Because often, after some time, they change their minds. And typically, many of them start learning Dutch once they have already been in the Netherlands for a few years. So, why is that? Why come people after some time to the conclusion that you can benefit a lot from learning a language? Well, that's what I want to discuss with you today. We will talk about the main reasons to learn Dutch. And if you plan to stay in the Netherlands, perhaps after your studies, that may give you some very valuable insights. But I would like to start with my own story. And of course, not about how the Dutch language is helpful to me, because that's obvious. But rather how learning a foreign language helped me to get around in another country. And that basically all what I have today, both my professional life, but also my individual life, I owe to the fact that I once learned a language, an exotic language. The language of the country where I spent some time during my studies. So, back in 1999, I still was a student. And I wished to spend some time abroad because spending time abroad during your studies is good. At least that was what people told me before. I didn't have a clue why, but all my friends went abroad and the faculty at my university also really stimulated it, so why not? And I chose Russia because I liked the adventure and I was always somehow attracted to that enormous country. And I also really liked the sounds of the language. And I thought, how cool would it be if I could really speak a little bit of Russian? So, before my trip, I had bought a self-study book for learning Russian, and I actually had learned quite a lot. And once in Russia, I lived in a flat with other foreign students. We had a great time together. And in our free time, we were exploring the country and we were meeting the locals, especially during all kinds of drinking parties. So we had the chance to practice some Russian, which was more difficult than I thought, but the good thing, the more vodka, the better you can speak Russian. But it was not only speaking Russian for fun. Part of my program there was an internship at a Russian company. And some of the employees didn't speak English, so I had to speak Russian with them. And although at a very basic level, I found out a lot more about the country than I knew. And because of all those talks, I started to realize that there were actually a lot of opportunities, and that I was probably at a place that was going to be booming in the upcoming years. So I stayed in Russia and I decided to learn much more Russian. And after a while, my knowledge of the language was at a level that I could read newspapers, I could understand TV, I could read books related to my profession, and I could even dive into the legislation and read all about procedures, taxes, forms to complete, and all about starting a business, because that's what I did. I started my own business in Russia, and Dutch companies could hire me as a consultant on the spot who spoke the language and who could help them on their projects in Russia. And at the same time, I started a language center for Dutch people to go there for a short time to study Russian and have a place to live. Well, the business went well, and at the end, and I couldn't know that before I went there, I lived for more than 10 years in Russia. I could build a career, I made many friends, I had a great time, I really felt at home, and I also met someone I love, and all that because I knew the language. Now, would I have survived if I didn't know the language? Well, probably yes. Russia is not Holland, and certainly not everyone speaks English, but it's possible to live there even if you don't know the language. But the question is, would I have had such a great time, a successful career, without knowing Russian, and would I have stayed there for 10 years? Well, most likely not. During those 10 years, I saw a lot of Dutch people come and usually go after 2 or 3 years. But the ones who stayed, the ones who really became successful, they are the ones who learned the language. They are the successful entrepreneurs and the directors of companies. Oh, and oh yeah, before I forget to tell, my language center in Russia still exists today. Okay, so what can we learn from that? And do all the reasons why I had to learn Russian in order to live in Russia, do they also count for foreigners who want to stay for a longer time in the Netherlands? Because as said before, for Dutch people it's much more common to speak English, and the Netherlands is much more internationally orientated. Well, let's dive into this. But first, who am I to answer this question? I just told you a lot about Russia, and how do I know what are the reasons for people to learn Dutch? Well, after returning to the Netherlands 5 years ago, I decided to do the same in the Netherlands as I had done in Russia. In Russia, I organized intensive language courses with accommodation, so that people could learn the language where they speak it and are 100% focused on the learning process and socialize with other people who have the same goal. And I found out that in the Netherlands there are a lot of language schools teaching Dutch, but none of these schools offer it in a way I had done in Russia for the Russian language. So that was the start of the Dutch summer school and the Dutch winter school. Intensive Dutch classes with accommodation so that people live and study together, and where students are 100% focused on learning the language by leaving their daily life behind. Now, before the course, in the application form, we ask every student what are their reasons to learn Dutch. And during the course, I speak a lot with all these students, so based on the input of hundreds of students, I have made a top 10 of reasons to learn Dutch. And although these are the reasons for them to learn Dutch, if you are a student in the Netherlands, and perhaps you want to stay for a longer time than just your studies, then maybe most of these reasons will count for you as well. And the earlier you are aware of that, the earlier you can benefit from it. So let's start the top 10 reasons to learn Dutch. Op nummer 10, at number 10. Well, this is actually not one reason, but a bunch of reasons. We have quite some students who have never the plan to move to the Netherlands, and they are learning Dutch because they think it's fun to learn an exotic language. After all, it was one of my reasons to learn Russian. Some people are really polyglots and just want to learn a lot of languages. We once had a Japanese student for whom the Dutch language was his 13th language. And he was fluent in the 12 other languages. And also in the 4 weeks he spent in our school, he progressed like no one else. There are people who study Dutch because they have Dutch roots. Especially in the US and Canada, there are a lot of people with a Dutch surname because ancestors moved from Holland a few generations ago. Some are learning Dutch because that gives them access to the Dutch culture like music and literature. We once had a student who just wanted to be able to read the diary of Anne Frank in Dutch. And another student was a fan of Dutch musicals. And we had a student who simply wanted to learn the language after hearing one Dutch song. Well, and some are learning Dutch simply to spend their holidays in a Dutch-speaking environment. And then it's good to know, and you probably know that Dutch is spoken not only in the Netherlands, but also in Flanders, the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, in Suriname, and in the Dutch Antilles in the Caribbean. Okay, now, these are all reasons that are not so much related to living in the Netherlands, but the top 9, the next 9 reasons are. So, op nummer 9, at number 9. Well, not everybody speaks English that well. It's an absolute myth that everybody in the Netherlands speaks English well. And yet, if you meet with other higher educated people, you will find out they speak English well, or at least fairly well, because my own English is also not perfect. And also in tourist areas, most people speak English, and in Amsterdam, you might actually hear more English than Dutch on the street. But the main part of the Dutch population really only knows a bit of English. And more than half of the population would not understand English on TV without subtitles. So if you want to be able to have conversations that go a bit further than just telling your name and asking for the road with all the Dutch, then for sure you need to know the language. Op nummer 8, at number 8. Maybe you recognize this feeling. You are part of a group, so you are not lonely. But you cannot understand the people around you. The feeling like you are a dog sitting with the family in the kitchen while they are having dinner. And the only thing you can do is watch them. Perhaps you already have had that experience. You are new in a group of Dutch people. In the beginning, they are very social and everybody will remind each other to speak only in English so that you can understand. But then, after a while, usually they fall back to Dutch and you may feel a bit isolated. I can tell you that in my beginning period in Russia, I really had this feeling of being a dog, a lot. And it gives some kind of uncertain feeling. But it gave me the motivation to continue studying. I just wanted to be able to understand everything when being in a group of people. And once you master the language, you will have the feeling that you are in full control of the situation. Op nummer 7, at number 7. If you learn a language, you also learn about the culture because these things go hand in hand. And with culture, now I don't mean music, paintings and other pieces of art, but really how it works here and the way people go along. By learning the language, you might be able to understand the Dutch a lot better. Why take decisions in one way, which is maybe opposite to your way. And also quite important, you will start to understand the type of jokes, because really, some jokes might seem very offensive if you don't know the language and the culture. And I would like to give a very simple example. The next situation I experienced with Russians, with the Dutch, and with Americans. Imagine, you are done with the dinner, and there are both men and women at the table. And then one of the men says, The dinner was nice. Now the girls can do the dishes. In Russia, I was with friends and one guy said this and the girl stood up and started doing the dishes. It was not a joke. In Holland, that would clearly be a joke. Everybody would laugh about it. The level of emancipation is high, so it would never come up in someone's mind that this is serious. Actually, the chance is high that the men themselves end up in doing the dishes. But once I made a mistake to say this joke when there was an American girl part of the group. And that resulted in a huge debate. It was clearly not a funny joke to her, and I realized that I had to be careful with Dutch humor. Yeah, to me, it's clear that women and men are equal and that everything else is clearly a joke to me. But that does not count for everybody. By learning the Dutch language, you will definitely start to understand that how rude we sometimes sound, it's not all intended that rude. Op nummer 6, at number 6. If you learn Dutch, you simply will have access to another level of information and to much more information. An example. If I want to find out something about a Russian singer, I go to the Russian version of Wikipedia, because it will have much more information than the English one. Now imagine that you can watch the Dutch news, read Dutch newspapers and journals, and watch Dutch TV shows. For sure, you will know a lot more than is published in English on the expat websites. And when I was starting my company in Russia, really the country reports of Ernst & Young did not really help me further. The sources with the information I really needed were all in Russian. And whatever it is you need to know when living in the Netherlands, whether it is on a professional level or how to apply for tennis lessons, the information that will help you best will be in Dutch. Op nummer 5 at number 5. Obviously, life will be so much easier if you can communicate in Dutch on the street, in shops, at university, in school. Simple instructions, conversations, you will be able to get around much faster. You will save so much time if you can quickly explain what you need and you end up with the right thing. I once had a student in my Russian language school who bought some beauty cream for her face. And she was right, it was for her face. But she missed the instruction that she had to put it on for just 2 minutes and then wash it off. And certainly not 12 hours later after a night of sleep. You can imagine that the beauty cream did not really make her pretty, and she preferred to stay inside for the next week. Op nummer 4. Reason number 4 to learn Dutch. To pass an exam. For many people, the reason to learn Dutch is simply that they need to if they want to stay here for a longer time. If you are a citizen of the European Union, this is not a requirement because you're free to live and work wherever you want within the EU. For people from outside the EU, it's different. As long as you are a student or you're on a work visa, of course, you don't need it. But if you want to stay longer and you don't want to be dependent on a certain employer, for a residence permit, you will need to prove that you know the Dutch language by doing an exam. And by the way, that is also the matter if you want to obtain the Dutch nationality. The most common exams are the basic civic integration examination abroad at level A1 for getting a provisional residence permit, an exam that you do at the Dutch embassy or consulate. The civic integration exam, the famous inburgeringsexamen at level A2 for getting a permanent residence permit. Then the state exam NT2 program 1, that's level B1. This exam you can do instead of the civic integration exam. And the state exam NT2 program 2, that's level B2. And this level is required for some jobs, or for example, if you want to do a study taught in the Dutch language. Op nummer 3, at number 3. If you really want to integrate into Dutch society, you need to know Dutch. And with integrating, I mean making friends, becoming a member of some club, for example, a sports club, asking the neighbors for extra chairs if you have a party, and don't forget to invite them. These kind of things, how you interact with each other and and understanding how things work. But also how the Dutch look at you. The Dutch are known as a very tolerant nation, but it's an illusion that everyone will treat you as someone equal. Maybe the Dutch are not as tolerant as they think about themselves, and by that I definitely do not say that everyone is racist. They might just say things with the best intentions, but leaving you with the feeling that you are an alien to them. And just an example. I have a friend from India who works in the Netherlands already for 6 years. At lunch, at his job, recently, a Dutch colleague pointed at a sandwich with chocolate sprinkles, hagelslag in Dutch, saying, "Do you know what this is? This is typical Dutch." Of course he knows. He is in the Netherlands for 6 years. But because he doesn't speak Dutch yet, other people see him as if he just entered the country. I can tell from my personal experience that because I spoke Russian, the Russians treated me like one of them. The attitude of the people you live with is just so much different if you know the language well. From one point of view, it shows respect for the country you live in, and that is rewarded by respect from the other side. And that will help you in many ways. Op nummer 2, at number 2. Work. And to be honest, before diving into the statistics of the reasons to learn Dutch from our students, I had hoped this would come out as the number 1 reason to learn Dutch, which would be an excellent conclusion of a presentation when speaking to a group of international students. Nevertheless, still at number 2, should you learn Dutch for a job in the Netherlands? The answer is yes. Although the business environment is really international in the Netherlands, it can be hard to find a job if you don't speak Dutch. And I mean, of course, a job in the field of your studies. If you studied to be an engineer, you would like to work as an engineer and probably not as a waiter. Most Dutch employers prefer to see someone who speaks their language simply because the conversations on the work floor are usually in Dutch. So for most jobs, it's an absolute requirement. But even if the job listings are in English, when there are more ideal candidates for a certain position, there is a good chance that the company prefers to hire the one who speaks Dutch. And you perhaps might say, hey, but there are so many expats living in the Netherlands sent by an international company. And apart from a good salary, they also get an apartment to live and other benefits, and they don't speak Dutch at all. Well, it's one illusion I had when I decided to stay in Russia. I thought, oh, and then I just take this kind of expat job for a Dutch company. Forget it, if you are a starter on the labor market. The further you are in a career, then yes, the more you can build your unique portfolio of skills and experience and a network. That may lead to a position where language skills are less important, but not when you just graduated. On the other hand, see it as a chance. If you know the language, it is something in which you can diversify from other candidates on the labor market who don't speak English. However, and I have to say this, it is possible that for certain professions it is different. There are deficits on the Dutch labor market in certain fields, and there the employers are happy with anyone. And then, of course, the language plays a less important role, at least from the point of view of getting a job. But even if this is your case, look further than that. How about career development within a company that gave you the job? If you know the language, that definitely will help you. And not only because it is on your CV, but you probably will work better if you understand everything, and you will easier go along with your Dutch colleagues. And one more reason, knowing an exotic language, a language that is not just English or French, German or Spanish, that can also open a lot of doors in your further career, even if you don't live in the Netherlands. Because Dutch companies are everywhere. I met in Russia quite some Russians who had learned to speak Dutch fluently, and they actually all had very good jobs in Dutch companies because of their language skills. So even if you think you won't live in the Netherlands forever, you might benefit in your future jobs abroad from speaking Dutch. But still, a job is not the most common reason to learn Dutch. And work is maybe not the most important thing in life. There is something that's much stronger, and I think you can guess it. The number one reason why people are learning Dutch is simply love. That's what most people of our summer and winter school indicate as the reason to learn Dutch. They have a Dutch lover, and they prepare for a life together in the Netherlands. And then all the reasons that I mentioned before become actual for them. Often the parents-in-law do not speak English well. They don't want to feel like a dog when they are with the family. They want to understand the culture, have access to all information, want to be able to communicate normally in daily life, get the residence permit, integrate well, and get a job. And that will all contribute to a happy life together. Maybe this doesn't count for you. Maybe you are here in the Netherlands and you plan to live here, but you don't have a Dutch partner. Well, one day you might have. I didn't go to Russia because of a girl, but because I was there. At an age that you normally find a partner, I also found a Russian girl and I married her. In general, not all marriages between Dutch and Russian people are successful, I can say. But because I know the language, because I understand the culture, and because I can communicate with her parents, I consider that a very stable factor, and we are already together for 15 years. but the other way around as well. My wife learned Dutch and she learned it well. So when we moved to the Netherlands, she was able to integrate quickly. She understands the Dutch culture, the jokes. She can speak with my family and she had never had the feeling of a dog. And very important, she got the residence permit immediately because the exam was just very easy for her. And more than that, in the most difficult period in the labor market in 2012, when there was hardly any job to find, just 3 months after we entered the Netherlands, my wife had already a job. And with a job, I mean not doing the dishes. She had a career as an HR professional in Russia, and she had set her mind on continuing her career in that field. And because of her knowledge of Dutch, she found it, and she is now already working for 5 years at that company. Here again, the language helped us to feel home and build our future. So knowing the language has made our lives so much easier. I am very happy that I learned Russian when going to Russia, and my wife is happy that she learned Dutch when moving to the Netherlands. And we definitely wouldn't be able to live and work like we do now with an attitude that knowing English is enough. In case you doubted before this webinar whether to learn Dutch or not, or to continue to learn or not, I hope I have provided you with some views that on what learning a language can bring. And if you want to put these thoughts into action, and now comes the commercial part, this is how we can help with that. I have a free online course with videos and exercises called 1000 Most Common Words in Dutch that you can find on learndutch.org, together with a YouTube channel. With this course you can learn beginner vocabulary and actually a lot more, because it's a great introduction to the Dutch language, but also to the Dutch culture. And the same website has also premium courses. If you are really serious about learning Dutch, and you know that you want to become fluent, then it's very important to start learning with a good grammar base from the beginning. Then you will benefit a lot more from that in the end. And my recommendation, do the course #DutchGrammar. And of course, we offer intensive courses during the summer and the winter school. Intensive courses, that means that during a short period, you are only busy with learning the language, being 100% focused, living and studying together. And by the way, we still have some places available for the Dutch Winter School in January. Well, I wish you good luck with learning Dutch. Veel succes. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will now dive into the questions on the chat. Okay. I see that there is a question in the chat box from Sofar. How many languages do I speak? And are you a polyglot? I speak 6 languages. We learned, and everybody actually do in Holland, we learn at school languages, French, German, and English, and of course, our native language, Dutch. You know that I speak Russian now, and I already told you that I'm in Spain, and after this webinar, I will go to my Spanish classes, because you never know, maybe one day I would like to live in Spain. The weather is just very good here. The next question. How difficult is the exam? Then it depends on which exam, and it depends on the preparation. The first exam, the exam that you do at the consulate, I think is really not so difficult. It's basically that you need to know a lot of vocabulary. Um, and my course, 1000 Most Common Words in Dutch, the online course, could already bring you maybe to the level that you can pass the exam, even though it's a free course. It's usually easy for people who are serious about learning Dutch and who learn more than just maybe 40 or 50 hours, then you can pass this exam. The inburgeringsexam, the civic integration exam, the exam that you do in the Netherlands in order to stay here for really a long time. It's difficult to say because for one person it's easy and for another it's difficult. If you, for example, really have the level A2, which is needed, then this exam should not be so difficult. But for some people, especially if you never have learned a foreign language, and if for example, English is your native language, or you don't speak English that well, and you didn't learn other languages apart from your native language, it can be a challenge, and you need really to study well. It's not just 40 hours of study and then you're done. Count on at least maybe 150 or 200 hours that you will need to learn. How long will it? And that's for the A2 level, and of course, the higher you go, the more difficult it becomes. B1 means already that you need to study much more, and also level B1 is not only about doing a course, it's actually also to using it actively in daily life. So if you want to pass the state exam program 1, it's more than just taking courses. If you can reach level B1, for example, if you do 2 months of full-time study, then it's possible. But apart from that, you will really need to use it in daily life. And for level B2, actually counts that you really need maybe half a year of really speaking experience, because it's quite tough, and it's not something that you do only with having a course. How long will it take to master the Dutch language at a sufficient level? Well, if we say that for surviving and living in the Netherlands and maybe to make friends, etc., level B1 is enough, then for a higher educated person, I just told you, if you study intensively, so full-time 2 months, you should be able to reach that level. If we talk about B2, which is the level, really the professional level, and you're not yet fluent then, but you can at least manage to do your job in a Dutch-speaking environment. Yeah, you need, apart from a lot of study, which is maybe 3 months full-time or 4 months full-time study, you really need to live in the Netherlands and to speak it every day. Okay, that were the questions that I'm able to answer at this moment. And my colleague at Nuffic just wanted me to remind you that tomorrow there is a webinar about Friday drinks. Friday drinks are very typical in the Netherlands. It's where you do the networking, maybe as a student, but also certainly at the job. That webinar is also at 12:30, and the registration link you can find on the Study in Holland Facebook page under the event, but that you will find it there. You will probably know it. In the normal chat, there is in the chat below the presentation, there are some open questions. I will end the presentation now from the camera and the speaking point of view, but I will try to answer the questions together with my colleague in the chat. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you really are motivated to learn Dutch and that you understand the essence of speaking the language. Thank you very much.